This podcast is made possible by Planful.
This is Anna King, CFO of Mesh Payments, and you're listening to CFO Thought Leader Podcast.
This is episode 847.
Always minding the business around expenses. I would think that I'm seeing in part of our planning for next year is to make sure that we maintain flexibility for what may be around the corner. And so we've really, during the planning process, been working with our teams around cost consciousness, making sure that we're flexible and prepared for next year, and probably we have been a little bit conservative about those revenue growth rates for next year. Again, just sort of making sure we can adapt to anything we see in the market.
Hi, it's Jack. On today's show, we welcome back Jim Morgan, CFO of CallRail. I don't know about you, but we can't help but cringe when a finance leader tells us they don't want to be known as the CFO of No. That shopworn label for CFOs who enjoy giving a thumbs down to allocation requests. So we were pleased when CFO Jim Morgan of CallRail steered clear of the characterization when he joined us as a return guest recently. Still, we were curious, what's replaced the CFO of No label when it comes to finance leaders projecting their diligence when it comes to monitoring risk and governance practices? For CFO Jim Morgan, that means asking the question, are we minding the business? It's a question, Morgan says, that has helped the company achieve trade-offs when it comes to tough decisions and resource allocation and risk abatement. And it's one CallRail has now codified, having made it one of CallRail's 5 cultural statements or values that they lead with. You'll hear about minding the business and much more on today's episode. We begin after this. With so much change around us and your need for increasing agility, you have to equip your team to win, and you have to do it now. Join over 1,300 companies of all sizes using Planful to help plan and execute with greater confidence. Planful integrates your critical financial processes to serve the data you need, insights you demand, and the answers necessary to manage your business optimally. Planful lets you plan better, close faster, and report more accurately. And Planful's not just for finance and accounting. It's for the entire business to plan, collaborate, and drive increased financial performance. Take full control of how you administer and manage all of your financial processes and data. And put finance first collaboration at the heart of every decision. When finance is a team sport, you can be a champion. With Planful, you'll be a champion of finance. Get in the game by going to planful.com to learn more. Hello, we're speaking with Jim Morgan, CFO of CallRail. Jim, welcome back.
Thanks, Jack. I appreciate you having me and looking forward to the conversation.
So, Jim, you were featured on one of the more popular episodes of our 2022 season, and some of the listeners might recall that you made some interesting comments regarding company culture at the time and your belief that finance leaders should be playing a more integral role in culture. We're going to talk about that with you on this episode. But first, as always, our price of admission, Jim, is to ask you to look back first and reflect on a past experience, something you experienced on the way up, maybe, and you believe has continued to inform you as a finance leader. What would that be? Anything for us?
Yeah, Jack, I appreciate the opportunity to kind of share a little bit more. I think last time I talked a little bit about my first jump from sort of large companies to small companies and all that entails. And have to say that's probably the biggest influence on my finance career. But the one I'd like to talk about is just sort of my involvement and a CFO's involvement in M&A transactions. And so I think that just is such a interesting sort of event for a company and certainly for a finance group and a CFO to go through. So there's a couple that I would highlight that just really influenced sort of my career, my development, and certainly sort of prepped me for the ongoing CFO role. And the first was really, I think it was my second sort of early stage startup company. Um, we decided to buy a competitor in our space, an adjacent space, happened to be a local company here in Atlanta. And so I was able to be part of that process really from sort of day one in terms of seeing that transaction through and just getting to do that first M&A deal all the way from initial conversations with founders through sort of a financial pro forma and putting that together to the LOI to legal documents. I'm no lawyer, but certainly have a big impact and sort of involvement in that role to the organizational design, closing the transaction, and then probably maybe a little surprising to me at that time, the day sort of two work that starts after you close the deal and you kind of think you're done. And it's interesting, that's such a wide range of skills and experiences, right? From convincing a couple founders to join our company and creating a financial model and then going through the legal process. It really gave me exposure to a lot of different areas. And I think it's just a good sort of encapsulation of all the things and areas and responsibilities that a CFO can have. So I'd say that's probably one of the highlights. And I think an interesting area, certainly sort of outside the traditional finance, is how important communications and change management are as part of the role. Whether those initial conversations and sort of selling why this is a good deal for those founders to combine companies, to standing up in front of the new employees of the company and telling them, welcoming them to the organization and telling them that, things are going to be okay and setting the vision going forward. So I think it was really interesting. And then, so as part of that M&A, so I had a chance to kind of do that on the buyer side. And then I got the chance to go through that process sort of being bought and had a little more empathy for that process as we combined companies several years later, combined companies with another Atlanta company. And I had a chance to sort of see that from the other side and help my company go through that process. And again, sort of address certainly the financial and legal and sort of structure aspects of the deal, but really the people and communications and bringing everyone along with that sort of process. And so those are certainly things that I leverage now in my role and future roles after those transactions.
Can I ask you, and we talked on the first episode to distinguish you from the accounting world, you're really more or less an FP&A side of the house type of individual. But did that M&A deal, that original deal, you came into it as a more junior FP&A executive, and it seems like you would be much more seasoned on the other side of the deal, which I think happens with a lot of finance leaders. But would it be accurate?
I think so. I think that's right. And so I would not only say seasoned sort of from an FP&A perspective, it's one thing to sort of work on budgets and forecast within your company, but from an FP&A perspective, forecasting a combined business and the business model, why that's going to be good is certainly the seasoning. I would say the sort of C-level executive seasoning really kind of came through to that, the entire deal and process. And the companies I work with, which are, a little on the smaller side and going through scaling, you really do a lot of different things. And so that's really the learning from a broader sort of CFO perspective is it's not really just the finance, that's sort of expected that you're going to be able to run those things, the FP&A side, the model, the financial value prop, but really those other areas in terms of like what's the vision and how are you going to communicate and what is the plan to do integration and sort of day two was a big learning for me and probably one of those first areas where I kind of went in saying, oh, I just need to be the finance person. And I kind of came out of it saying, well, there's a lot more than just sort of knowing the numbers really well. These are other areas I need to be thinking about in my role.
Well, we mentioned up front, we wanted to talk to you about organizational culture and how exactly finance leaders can play a more integral role there. This isn't always easy. You can have a a great relationship with your HR leader or all of the top management as a finance leader, but that doesn't mean your leadership is having an impact on culture or helping shape the culture. Tell us more about this integral role that you believe finance can and should play.
Yeah, for us, it's really interesting at CallRail. I probably have it a little bit easier because one of our five culture statements is mind the business, which is music to a CFO's ears. That we actually promote and reward and continually talk about minding the business. It's what I ask of the team every day, and so I think it's naturally easy for me to be a culture carrier of that. And I really sort of leverage that mind the business mentality to focus on being a business partner to all of our different departments, of course, to the other leaders of the company, but really to the individuals throughout the different departments. And so for myself, it's really kind of given a common link. It's one thing to kind of a finance person to come over and start trying to explain why things are important, but to be able to tie that back to a company culture statement, like this is how we mind the business. We spend dollars as if they're our own. We take care of our customers. And so I think it's a huge part of the finance mandate. It's certainly part of our culture. And so being able to sort of marry those two works really well. And again, I'm fortunate that it's enforced in our five culture statements.
I have to believe there are situations where there's a member in the management team, not from the finance function, who is quite influential when it comes to the culture. This person has the opportunity to communicate broadly across the organization, but sometimes they're not on cue with what you're suggesting, minding the business. They're sending mixed signals in terms of, and I think minding the business, it's sort of a polite, gentle reminder of the shared mission. Hello, remember, this company has certain priorities for its health, and we need to grow it in a sensible way. And culturally, you're trying to instill those priorities and concerns.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it just gives a common language to how finance people may try to influence other parts of the organization. So I use mind the business as a prioritization feature and sort of a term that we can use to help folks understand the trade-offs that we need to make when we are thinking about all different sort of areas, from healthcare cost to where we're going to spend, discretionary dollars. It's a nice sort of framework to step back with folks and say and answer together, are we minding the business? And in the spirit of using all of our dollars, is this the best place we want to spend our dollars, or what are the trade-offs from doing that? And I find that's a easy common ground versus myself saying that I don't think that's a good spend of dollars, or it doesn't really follow our mandate. And so we certainly have those. Those conversations are a little more difficult. We've got folks who understand that right away, and some folks who don't. But again, coming back to the idea of how do I be a business partner, and how do we ultimately achieve those trade-offs and prioritizations for us, the mind the business culture statement. Again, we call that a culture statement. It's almost really a finance statement, but we're able to bring that to all of our employees. They understand it, and we found it to be really beneficial.
So, just again to issue the question, are we minding the business? And again, this is something that management just issues widely. It's kind of a question that's routinely being asked. Is that right? Is that how it's done?
Yep. Yeah, we really do. And I'll just to be specific, for company events or holidays, or we're looking at times of the year when we all can take time off. And we know that some groups just aren't able to do that. And we say we need to mind the business. We need to take care of our customers is another one of our culture statements. And so using those to explain why a team needs to be available to take customer calls. We're minding the business. And so just the good business sense. So I love it. Again, it's an easy phrase for our team to understand, that it conveys a lot of the trade-offs and the sort of priorities that my organization, finance and administration, are trying to drive with the organization.
So here's some pushback, more for finance leaders at large than for you, Jim. But why is it that finance leaders struggle with delivering this message? Again, it's sort of just a gentle reminder, but they do. It's just how it's the message delivered really matters. So that's what I liked about this simple question that you like to use. But why is it they struggle with this?
Yeah, I think people struggle. I think finance leaders, people in sort of accounting finance roles, struggle with it because it seems so second nature to them that folks should mind the business. A lot of the conversations that I have with my groups are, it's so obvious that we shouldn't be doing these things, or that's not a good use of our resources. But I think just stepping back and understanding how other groups, other departments are sort of viewing that, the language they speak, is really the challenge. So I think it's just sort of bridging that communications gap a little bit and getting on common ground. And for finance folks, again, who generally operate in kind of a black and white or more procedure process driven world, I think the difficulty again is sort of bridging that gap. To expand the point a little bit on mind the business, we also, it kind of goes hand in hand with think like an owner, and it's another sort of it's not a culture statement for us, but I think it goes hand in hand with mind the business. Is we want every employee to think like they're an owner of the company, and actually they are through our equity programs, and so we emphasize that a lot. But to your point about finance leaders, I think sort of connecting the dots for everyone and just understanding that everyone doesn't approach those decisions and priority sort of trade-offs the way a finance professional or an accounting professional would. And so just understanding their perspective coming into the conversation is how you're probably going to be most effective.
Well, Jim, thank you for sharing that with us and allowing us to explore it with you. Again, I just think it's a very simple approach that other finance leaders can borrow and tailor to their own means. So thank you for allowing us to go over that again with you. We are once again going to ask you for a finance strategic moment. And I don't want to disappoint our listeners here. Again, I try to keep this really broad to just allow the finance leader to come forward and share what they would like to share as far as a moment of strategic insight or a learning moment along the way. Anything come to mind?
Yeah, I'll share one that's got a corollary to it. But in one of my prior roles, I had an opportunity to go through revenue recognition pre-clearance process with the SEC. This company was a pre-IPO, and so I got to go through this process, which for those listeners aren't familiar, is basically getting sort of buy off from the SEC that how you think this revenue stream should be treated is actually how the SEC would agree with you. And it's quite a complex process. You work with your auditors, you work with the national office of your auditors. Ultimately, you end up working with the SEC on some pretty complex topics. And we were doing it because we really didn't have a comparable in the market for our revenue recognition model and sort of our business model. So it was a really interesting problem. And as background, I'm not an accountant. I came up through the FP&A world. And so I found myself in the middle as CFO of navigating the waters of a pretty complex accounting process. And I think there was a lot of learnings and insight through that really shaped that decision at that time, the organization, and certainly my career. And I think a few of those just to highlight. I think one of the key parts of the CFO role is to really be able to make complex ideas and concepts simple and explainable and understandable to folks who aren't accountants or aren't revenue recognition experts. And I'm on a journey with that. It is certainly a skill that I've seen folks do really, really well, take complex ideas and basically boil it down to what does it mean for us? How's that going to impact the company? What sort of decisions should we make around it? Does it change our strategy? But it was probably one of the big learnings. And another takeaway, and I think that's just a nature of many finance folks, you want to be the expert, you want to know it all. You're not always going to be the expert. You need to know when to rely on the experts, how much you need to know, how deep you need to know. And again, a lot of times your role is sort of bringing that information back and making it actionable to the organization. So in this example, we ultimately got through that process. we were able to communicate that back internally to our investors or our board. And it was a great sort of learning process and event for me personally, but also for the company in terms of the step forward.
Hi, it's Jack. I hope you're enjoying our talk with CFO Jim Morgan of CallRail. We mentioned earlier Jim was a return guest, and if you'd like to hear his original episode, it was number 747. I would say nearly 100 episodes ago, but it's actually exactly 100 episodes ago. Not sure what that means. We are also featuring a video of Jim on our website this week, so be sure to visit us at cfothoughtleader.com. And now back to episode 847, featuring CFO Jim Morgan. Excellent. Great one to share with us, Jim. Thank you for that. Want to mention CallRail's had some strong growth over since we've last spoken. I know you've surpassed 75 million in annual recurring revenue, so congratulations. I'm sure there's much more to this story. But if you wouldn't mind, share a little bit about the company and then tell us about your priorities for the next 12 months.
Yeah, absolutely. Would love to. So just as a refresher on what CallRail. So we were founded by a small business owner who set out to solve the problem of making calls more accessible to these small businesses who need to know what's driving their phone to ring, what sort of leads, how do these leads and customers find them. So we started off about 10 years ago with this call tracking product as sort of the industry we're in. And have really turned that into a lead intelligence platform for small businesses. So we now have a forms tracking product. We have the ability for our customers to have insights into their calls in terms of what items are being discussed, and all with the idea of how do they market smarter. You know, a lot of these sort of marketing attribution problems have been solved in the digital world if you're communicating and finding customers online. But the idea of once you pick up the phone, a lot of times you really have no idea where that customer lead came from. And so our software and our platform helps business owners answer that question. So today I'll also share we're a little bit over 300 employees. And so we've made great progress. As you mentioned, we surpassed 75 million in annual recurring revenue last year and are seeing great results this year. So for us and our company, and certainly my priorities, the needs of our customers in terms of these digital interactions that drive phone calls continues to increase at a rapid pace. I think everyone knows the sort of the classic digital interactions and whether you're buying things online, but there's a lot of companies and verticals that really rely on phone calls. So you think about home services, legal, automotive, where you may use a digital interaction, a digital search engine to find information, but you're ultimately going to call. And so all the information that can come along from that phone call is really, really important for our small businesses. And so how we're bringing more information around that lead, how they found the customer, the business, our customer, the types of interactions, whether they're a first-time caller, how many times they've called, how long those calls are really sort of important. And so bringing more of that information is on our roadmap for the next 12 months, enhancing that information. And the second piece of that is really, we have 200,000 businesses that we serve on our platform across these different verticals. We have access to a lot of information, of course, aggregated and anonymized across that. How can we bring that information to our customers? And so think about a law firm that's using our platform, some information. How are other lawyers marketing to their customers? How are they finding their customers? What are the best search terms to use? When do they find that they receive most of their phone calls? When are phone calls going unanswered? So some really interesting insights all around customer behavior and sort of lead intelligence is where we're focused on. And again, back to that, how do we use information that we have on our platform to help our customers? That's sort of the growth for us over the next couple of years. And I would say the table stakes of that is how do we do it securely across the platform in a world where that's obviously very important to make sure that we are protecting our customers' information across the board.
Jim, before you go, and since we have you here, got to ask you about this economic environment. what does it mean really? What is your thinking on it, and how is CallRail prepared to deal with it?
Probably not unusual. I'd say there is a ton of uncertainty, and you've got many finance folks at this time of the year going through planning for next year, and it's one of the more tricky times to try to create a annual plan for the next 12 months with just so much going on and so much sort of speculation about what's going to happen in the economy. And so our view on that, and I think it's an interesting sort of challenge for the CFO role in the types of companies I've been involved in, always focused on revenue growth. How do we acquire new customers, retain our existing customers, always minding the business around expenses. I would think that I'm seeing in part of our planning for next year is to make sure that we maintain flexibility for what may be around the corner. And so we've really, during the planning process, been working with our teams around cost consciousness. And again, back to the first conversation, mind the business is a perfect framework for where do we want to spend? What's sort of nice to haves and what's really required to make sure that we can take care of our customers and provide value to them. And so I'd say that's the emphasis for us going into next year, making sure that we're flexible and prepared for next year, and probably we have been a little bit conservative about those revenue growth rates for next year. Again, just sort of making sure we can adapt to anything we see in the market.
Jim Morgan, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thank you, Jack. Really enjoyed it.
Hello, listeners. Do us a favor. Be certain to subscribe to CFO Thought Leader on Apple Podcasts, or if you're an Android user, check us out on Spotify or Google Play. If you like the show, please recommend it to a friend.